Today we are going to discuss housing policies around the world, and we have guests first from Chicago. We have Mr. Brandon Reilly.
As was mentioned, I represent the Central Business District in the city of Chicago. Post-global recession, we're experiencing a tremendous real estate boom in our Central Business District. About 45 tower cranes are currently in the air. We're seeing growth in certainly the hotel and hospitality industry. Large Class A commercial office structures are being constructed. We've seen a real boom in rental residential development, and now in just the past 10 to 11 months we've seen an influx of applications to construct mostly higher end condominium product in the central core of the city. Chicago, I think, like most cities around the world, is struggling with providing affordable housing. I think we have a pretty comprehensive policy approach, one that it starts from the assumption that all people, regardless of their income level, deserve affordable housing options in the city. We've adopted a one-size-does-not-fit-all approach. Each of the communities that make up the city of Chicago are unique and have different needs, and so we have to be sensitive to the market conditions in those communities. Some communities are not today attractive investment opportunities, so that requires cajoling by city government as policymakers. And it's a combination, a blended approach. We have some incentives and we have some penalties. And we find that the incentives are always the best way to go. We depend very heavily on partnerships, public-private partnerships with private real estate interests and developers, not only to develop our for-profit housing stock, but also to help us fund solutions that provide affordable housing stock. And so we have a series of benefits that developers can take advantage of when they construct a new residential rental building or condominium building. We provide you with additional density for your floor area, allow you to have additional height, a larger unit count, in exchange for providing and developing a certain number of units of affordable housing. We also have a requirement in the Central Business District that if you are increasing density on your site, or you hit a certain trigger of the number of units in your residential building, you must provide 10% of those units as affordable units within that new structure. The trend in downtown Chicago, in the private development community, is to pay an in lieu fee, a penalty if you will, to not construct those units within the new towers that they're putting up. That penalty is about $200,000 per unit, per required unit. That money is then paid into a fund, a trust fund, which is used to provide either vouchers or develop new affordable units throughout the city. Just recently we revised our laws regarding affordable housing, which require developers to build a certain number of units within 2 miles of the site that they're developing. If they choose not to do that, they pay a $225,000 per required unit penalty. On the flip side, when it comes to incentives, we understand that proximity to reliable public transit is important for moderate and lower income families, so they have access to jobs and economic opportunity. We greatly reward developers who take on projects that are built immediately proximate to transit lines, whether that's trains or major bus lines. We will allow them substantially more density and entitlements in exchange for making that investment. So it's a blended approach. Obviously we haven't found perfection yet. I don't know that anyone has, but it's one that requires a lot of collaboration, and frankly we can't accomplish our goals without continued for-profit growth in our housing sector. But our best partners in this effort, frankly, are the real estate community and the developers who are building these great towers.
Thank you very much. You mentioned that the government in the city of Chicago asks builders to have 10% for affordable housing. How do you mix that? Do you have a poor door and a rich door, or how do you manage this socially, the integration?
That's a great question. It depends on the development, but there are, in some cases, bifurcated entrances and amenities in these buildings. The practical reality is that in the central business district, the vast majority of our developers are electing to pay the penalties. So we, yeah, so what we've learned, and that's why our policies are now, we're changing them, and recently rewrote them just a few months ago. We have increased the penalties. So we have a trust fund that's flush with money, and now the trick is investing that money and working with private developers to build true affordable housing stock on land the city controls. One of the things that we've been doing just in the last couple of years is assembling all of the vacant parcels of land that we have in the underperforming communities in Chicago. The city of Chicago currently controls about 8,000 parcels of land, and we have been assembling those together into larger parcels. And I think it was mentioned by one of the earlier presenters, we are essentially practically giving that land to a developer to keep the cost of land very, very low, so that really the true cost driving the project is the construction material and labor. We're seeing some progress in that regard, but again, this is something we've really just started doing. For many years, the city of Chicago simply allowed these parcels to lay dormant and unused in an inefficient manner, but by pulling them together into larger parcels, that gives us a bit of leverage with the developer. In exchange for this very valuable land, these are the sorts of things and program we expect you to provide. At the same time, we're making major investments in our infrastructure. All of our 100-year-old water mains are currently being replaced. We've made major investments in our public transit system, especially our subway system, extending our rail lines further into the neighborhoods that are furthest from the job opportunities and the central business district. These are the sorts of things that investors want. Frankly, these are the types of things that struggling neighborhoods and communities need. So it's not all about the public-private partnership. I think there's a role for government to be making the critical investments in the infrastructure, the livability, the environment. We are a smart city. We have a smart grid that's being developed in Illinois. Many of our homes in the multi-unit buildings and single family now have smart meters for electricity. That's a big driver of cost in affordable housing complexes, the price of energy. So it really requires a holistic approach. It can't be putting all of your effort into one area. It really, and I think this is common regardless of where you live. Our affordable housing is certainly relative to where you live and what your condition is in your country. But I think the approach, what I'm hearing, it's very similar. It's all really comes down to how you execute the details. Chicago has tried a series of different versions of affordable housing solutions that frankly have failed. For the last several decades, the city of Chicago believed very much in high density affordable housing and subsidized housing complexes. They were generally built in neighborhoods that were nowhere near economic opportunity, that did not have good access to public transit. They became islands unto themselves. And it also created a segregated society in our city. So for lots of good reasons, we abandoned that policy. Over the last decade or so, the city of Chicago has demolished most of its high-density affordable housing and subsidized housing complexes in favor of scattered site housing, where we are integrating the less fortunate into middle-income and upper-middle-income neighborhoods where there are economic opportunities and a better quality of life and access to public open space and playgrounds and good schools. That approach takes a bit more time. It's certainly, from a efficiency perspective, not always most cost-effective. But I would say that the exception to that rule is related to transit-oriented development. And we absolutely encourage higher density projects with larger unit counts in planned developments next to major transit areas, especially rail lines. And so it doesn't mean you just stack up a bunch of affordable units into a structure. You wrap around that public open space, playgrounds, good public schools to sustain that community. So some placemaking is required. We provide subsidies and incentives for private enterprise to invest in these neighborhoods. We layer in an extra amount of public safety in infrastructure upgrades. So it is a comprehensive approach. This is something that's just underway in the last couple of years. So it remains to be seen how successful we'll be. But I think that the city of Chicago is certainly learning from past mistakes, and based on what I've learned from folks in other affordable housing sessions here at this conference, it sounds like a lot of cities are pursuing a similar path. But thank you for the question. And, you know, it's an incredibly complex issue. If there was a perfect solution, I think we'd all be implementing it today. But I think the most important part is that you need to have good progressive policy, and that's the role of government. But when it comes to executing those policies, we depend very heavily upon the private sector to be our partner. Regardless of what country you come from or what city you live in, most public bodies are not flush with cash and able to throw that around willy-nilly. So we do depend on financing from our private developer partners. But the idea here, I think, was mentioned by my friend to my left, that when you implement and execute a good public policy when it comes to affordable housing, it lifts, the tide lifts all boats, right? And so by taking care of our least fortunate and most vulnerable, that only strengthens our cities, even at the highest echelon of the income bracket. So it's been a pleasure being with you, and this is a really interesting panel discussion for me. Thank you very much.